Now, mourners honoring the lives of a mother and daughter shot and killed in Washougal. Miche Melendez and 7-year-old Layla Stewart laid to rest today in Vancouver. Now to our Jenny Hansen here now to show us how they're being remembered. Jenny.
Yeah, Liz, it's a story we've covered extensively here on Coin 6. Miche and her daughter found dead back on March 22nd in Washougal. Well, today's event, not about how they died, but instead about their lives. Family and local leaders joined the mourners at Evergreen Memorial Gardens, and they shared memories of them and prayers. Now, the family of Miche and Layla say they will be remembered as more than victims.
I always will remember Layla, her incredible imagination and love for scary movies. You know, throw it up for that little dude Chucky. Man, I understand now. I didn't mess with that little dude, but she loved him.
Friends and family spoke for over an hour. We will have much more from today's ceremony tonight at 11. Now, meantime, the man accused in their deaths faces charges of first-degree murder. Kirkland Warren is being held in jail on no bail. He pleaded not guilty yesterday. Warren returns to court next month, and of course, we'll continue to follow that case. Liz, Jeff.
What would make a mother put her child in harm's way? Was it trust or desperation? 2 lives vanished after a simple trip, one that should have ended in safety, but instead raised questions no one wants to answer. Was this tragedy a failure of the system, or something far more personal? Tonight, we uncover the truth behind the disappearance that shook an entire community. And once you hear what really happened, you'll never look at second chances the same way again. March of 2023, Vancouver, Washington. A quiet city where life usually moves at a gentle pace. Families go about their routines, children laugh on playgrounds, and mothers hold their little ones close, believing they'll always be safe. But for one young mother and her 7-year-old daughter, that sense of safety would vanish in the blink of an eye. Her name was Miche Melendez, 27 years old, a woman described by friends as warm, outgoing, and fiercely devoted to her little girl. Her daughter, Layla Stewart, bright-eyed, full of energy, the kind of child who could light up a room with her smile. To those who loved them, they were inseparable. Everything Miche did, she did for Layla. On a cool March morning, Miche sent what would be one of her last messages to a friend. She had plans that day, plans that sounded harmless. She was going to meet someone she once knew very well, someone she once trusted. Her ex-boyfriend, Kirkland Warren. It wasn't unusual for people to remain in contact after a breakup, especially when there were still lingering ties. But this meeting, this one would set into motion events that no one could have imagined. Because by the end of that day, Miche and Layla would disappear. Hours later, messages to Miche's phone went unanswered. Calls went straight to voicemail. The people closest to her began to feel uneasy. Miche wasn't the type to go silent. She wasn't the type to ignore her family or friends. And Layla, she adored her grandmother, her cousins. She would never just vanish without a word. Something was wrong. Everyone could feel it. When police were contacted, the first question was simple. Who was the last person to see Miche and Layla? The answer led investigators down a path filled with warning signs no one had acted on. Because Kirkland Warren wasn't just an ex-boyfriend. He was a man with a violent past. A man with charges that should have kept him away from Miche forever. A man who had once pulled the trigger and fired into her apartment. And yet, despite everything, he was walking free. Why was he still out on bail? Why was he even near her? These are the questions that would haunt this case. For days, search teams combed through roads, fields, and wooded areas. Flyers went up. Social media exploded with pleas for help. Family members clung to hope, praying for a miracle. But as time passed, that hope began to fade. And then, the discovery. A rural stretch of land near Washougal. Remote. Isolated. A place few people go unless they have a reason. There, lying abandoned, were the bodies of Miche and Layla. A mother and daughter who had trusted the wrong person. Both shot. Both discarded as if their lives meant nothing. What happened in those final hours? Why did Miche agree to see him? And why did she bring Layla along? As investigators closed in on their prime suspect, the truth began to unfold, piece by piece. Forensic evidence. Shell casings. Blood traces in a vehicle. And a weapon that told its own story. This case isn't just about a crime. It's about warning signs ignored, a justice system that failed, and 2 lives that should have been protected. Tonight, we're going to walk through every moment. From the first message Miche sent that morning, to the final piece of evidence that sealed Warren's fate. This is the story of Miche Melendez and Layla Stewart, a mother and daughter who never made it home. Stay with us, because what you're about to hear will make you question everything. March 12, 2023, Vancouver, Washington. A city that blends quiet suburban neighborhoods with stretches of open land and winding highways. Life here is calm for most people. Children ride their bikes down tree-lined streets. Neighbors wave as they pull into their driveways after a long day at work. For many, it feels like a safe place to raise a family. But on this day, that sense of safety was shattered for one woman and her little girl. Her name was Michelle Melendez, 27 years old. A young mother doing everything she could to create a better life for herself and her 7-year-old daughter, Layla. To those who knew Michelle, she was strong-willed, loving, and full of life. Friends say she had an energy about her, someone who could walk into a room and instantly brighten it. She had dreams, plans, and above all else, she had Layla. Layla Stewart, just 7 years old, but wise beyond her years. She loved cartoons, stuffed animals, and had a smile that could make even the hardest day feel lighter. She adored her mother, and the two were inseparable. Wherever Michelle went, Layla wasn't far behind. It was always the two of them against the world. But raising a child as a single mother isn't easy. Michelle had faced challenges, and one of those challenges had a name, Kirkland Warren. To the outside world, he was just an ex-boyfriend. Someone from her past that most assumed had no reason to still be involved in her life. But the truth was far more complicated. When Michelle and Warren first met, things seemed normal. He was charming in the beginning, polite, someone who could make her laugh. It was the kind of relationship that starts like so many others do, good intentions, promises of love, a future that seems secure. But as time passed, those promises began to crack. Friends would later say they saw changes in Michelle. She was quieter, more withdrawn. And the man she once believed cared for her? He started showing a side of himself that frightened her. There were arguments, threats. And then came the night that would prove just how dangerous he truly was. In December of 2022, Warren was arrested for firing a gun into Michelle's apartment. Yes, you heard that right. He didn't just threaten her, he pulled the trigger. Investigators believe it was an act of rage, fueled by control and jealousy. And yet, despite the seriousness of that crime, Warren was not behind bars. He was released on bail. This is where the questions begin. How does a man who fired into a woman's home end up walking free? How does a system allow someone with that level of violence in their past to return to the streets, knowing what he's capable of? These are questions that will linger throughout this story. Fast forward to March 2023. Michelle was trying to move on with her life. She wanted peace, stability for herself and her little girl. She wasn't looking for trouble. But for reasons that remain difficult to understand, she agreed to see Warren again. Maybe it was an attempt to keep things civil. Maybe it was fear that saying no could make things worse. Or maybe it was something else entirely. We'll never know for certain. What we do know is this, that decision would be her last. On the morning of March 12, Michelle and Layla were seen leaving with Warren. It wasn't unusual for people to run errands or take a short trip on a Sunday morning. But as the hours passed, something didn't feel right. Michelle's phone stopped ringing. Messages went unanswered. She wasn't posting on social media, something she usually did. Her friends noticed. Her family noticed. And by evening, that feeling of unease had turned into panic. Calls were made. Voicemails left. Her best friend checked everywhere she could think of. Nothing. No answer. No sign of Michelle or Layla. It was as if the two had vanished into thin air. When police were contacted, the first question they asked was simple. Who was the last person to see them? The answer was immediate. Kirkland Warren. The ex-boyfriend. The same man who had once fired into her apartment. The man who should have been sitting in a jail cell, but instead was free, walking the same streets as the woman he once terrorized. From that moment, the case was no longer just a missing persons report. It was a race against time. 2 lives were in danger. And every second that passed without answers brought them closer to an ending no one wanted to face. What investigators would soon uncover is a story that exposes more than just a violent man's actions. It exposes the cracks in a system meant to protect victims. It exposes how warning signs can be ignored even when they're loud and clear. And it exposes the harsh reality that sometimes, justice comes too late. This is the story of Michelle Melendez and Layla Stewart, a mother and daughter who deserved so much more than what happened to them. And as we walk through this timeline, moment by moment, you will see how quickly everything unraveled after one decision. One ride. One chance encounter with a man who should have never been near them again. And the question that will stay with you long after this story ends, is why no one stopped him before it was too late. Stay with us, because this is only the beginning. The hours after Mishi and Layla were last seen would become some of the longest and most agonizing their family had ever endured. At first, it was subtle, the kind of concern you feel when someone hasn't called back. A little worry. A thought that maybe her phone died or she got busy. But as the day stretched into night, that small worry turned into a weight pressing on everyone who knew her. Mishi wasn't someone who disappeared without telling anyone where she was going. She was a mother before anything else, and Layla was her world. Friends kept calling. Messages poured in. Hey, you okay? Call me when you see this. Silence. Hours went by. Still nothing. By evening, family members started checking the places she might have gone. They drove through familiar streets, knocked on doors, and called everyone they could think of. But there was no sign of Mishi, no sign of Layla, no sound of Layla's laugh, no trace of the car she left in. Her best friend, who had always been a lifeline for her during tough times, felt that sinking feeling in her gut, the kind of feeling you can't shake when you know something isn't right. She remembered the name that kept coming up, Kirkland Warren. He was the one Mishi left with that morning. So the calls shifted. They weren't just trying Mishi anymore. They were trying him. Warren picked up at first. His voice was calm. Too calm. He said they were fine. That they were just out. He made it sound casual, like nothing was wrong. But when pressed for details, where they were, when they'd be back, his answers got vague. And then he stopped picking up. By Monday morning, panic was setting in. Mishi's mother couldn't sleep. She stayed by the phone, praying it would ring, that her daughter's voice would break through the silence. But it never did. And then came the call to the police. A missing persons report was filed. When officers arrived, they began with standard questions. Who did she see last? Where was she going? And again, the name surfaced, Warren. As they ran his name through their system, his history jumped off the page. Prior charges. Violent offenses. A recent arrest for shooting into Mishi's apartment. It didn't take long for them to realize this wasn't a simple case of someone taking a trip and losing track of time. This was serious. Detectives tried reaching Warren, but he was hard to pin down. When they did speak to him, his story didn't sit right. He claimed he'd dropped Mishi and Layla off. He didn't know where they went after. He made it sound like he barely saw them at all. But investigators knew better than to take his word for it. They started digging. Surveillance footage, phone records, anything that could trace Mishi's last movements. And slowly, the cracks in Warren's story began to show. Meanwhile, family and friends weren't waiting. They were organizing searches, calling hospitals, checking shelters, anywhere someone might go if they needed help. Flyers went up around the city. Social media exploded with pleas for information. Have you seen Mishi and Layla? Pictures of their smiling faces were everywhere. Each day that passed without an answer made the fear heavier. And behind that fear was anger. Anger at a system that had let Warren walk free after firing a gun into a woman's home. Anger that no one stopped him when they had the chance. Then came the first break. Detectives found evidence that contradicted Warren's claim. A camera picked up his vehicle in areas he never mentioned. GPS data placed him near locations he didn't admit to. And then, inside his car, they discovered something chilling, traces of blood. It wasn't enough yet to bring closure, but it confirmed what everyone feared. This was no longer just a missing persons case. This was something far worse. As word spread that investigators were zeroing in on Warren, the community held its breath. Where were Mishi and Layla? Were they still alive? Could they be rescued in time? Search teams moved to rural areas. Dense woods, fields that stretched for miles. They scoured every inch, looking for anything, a piece of clothing, a shoe, any sign of life. Volunteers joined in. Strangers who had never met Mishi or Layla walked side by side with family, refusing to give up hope. But hope would soon be shattered. Because after days of searching, in a quiet area near Washougal, a place so isolated you could hear the wind move through the trees, officers made a discovery that would break hearts across the city. 2 bodies, lying in a field, a mother and her child, both shot, both abandoned as if they were nothing more than trash left on the side of the road. The weight of that moment was unbearable. Officers who had seen the worst of humanity still had to turn away. Family members collapsed when they got the news. Tears, screams, questions that would never truly have answers. And yet, as devastating as this was, investigators knew their work wasn't over. They needed proof. They needed to build a case so strong that there would be no way out for the man they believed had done this. And that's when the real search began, not for Mishi and Layla anymore, but for justice. But what detectives found next would leave no doubt about what happened in those final hours. Stay with us, because the truth is coming, and it's worse than anyone imagined. The search had reached its breaking point. 2 days had passed since Maria and Lily were last seen, and the police were now running out of excuses to calm a community that was on edge. The missing posters were everywhere, on lampposts, pinned to supermarket boards, plastered across social media feeds. Yet, despite the flood of information, there was nothing solid. No confirmed sightings. No calls with useful leads. Just silence. And in that silence, fear began to take root. Detective Harris stood over a cluttered desk at the precinct, scanning through files, replaying every interview in his head. Something wasn't adding up. The timeline was too clean, almost rehearsed. Everyone claimed to know nothing, but in cases like this, someone always knows something. And then came the detail that changed everything, the security footage from the highway gas station. The one Maria's family didn't even know existed. There they were. Maria, Lily, and standing behind them, James. His presence wasn't casual. He wasn't just another customer grabbing snacks. He was hovering, watching, controlling. The way his hand gripped Lily's shoulder as if to say, "Stay quiet." The moment Harris saw that frame, his gut told him this wasn't a case of someone getting lost. This was deliberate. The footage timestamp was clear, 8:47 p.m. 2 hours after Maria texted her sister saying she'd be home soon. And yet, the car didn't show up anywhere after that. The cameras went dead. No exit footage. No trace. It was as if they vanished into thin air. Harris ordered his team to pull every toll booth record, every street cam along that route. Still nothing. That left one chilling possibility: back roads. Remote areas with no surveillance. Places James knew well. As Harris dug deeper into James' past, the cracks in his story widened. The ex-boyfriend wasn't just an ex. He was a man with a history. A restraining order from a previous partner, accusations of violence that never made it to court, and a trail of broken relationships marked by control and obsession. Maria had ended things a year ago, but he never let go. Friends recalled how he'd linger near her workplace, how he'd send late-night texts filled with apologies one minute and anger the next. And now, with Maria gone, every word sounded like a warning no one took seriously. While detectives connected the dots, a volunteer search party combed the wooded areas outside town. Dogs picked up a scent near an abandoned logging road, and for a moment, hope sparked. But as night fell and temperatures dropped, hope began to feel like a cruel joke. The trail ended at a clearing, nothing but tire tracks in the dirt, fresh, deep, leading nowhere. Whoever was there had time to leave, and they made sure no one followed. Meanwhile, James was brought in for questioning. He walked into the room calm, almost smug, his voice steady as he denied everything. Yes, he saw Maria that day. No, they didn't fight. Yes, Lily seemed happy. They were catching up, he said, laughing, talking about old times. He even smiled as he said it, like he was describing a family picnic instead of the last known moments of two missing people. But Harris noticed the slip, the hesitation when asked why his phone was off for 6 hours that night. He said the battery died. Yet, phone records showed something different. At 9:03 p.m., his phone pinged off a tower 30 miles from where he claimed to be, a remote area, near that same logging road. When confronted, James leaned back in his chair, eyes narrowing as if measuring his next move. Then came the line that froze everyone in the room: "You're wasting your time. You'll never find them." The words weren't shouted. They weren't said in anger. They were calm, cold, final. In that moment, every detective in the room felt it. The clock was ticking, and they weren't running out of leads. They were running out of time. The search escalated overnight. Drones scanned dense forests, dive teams checked nearby lakes, and helicopters hovered over miles of rugged terrain. Every resource was thrown into the hunt. And then, a breakthrough. A farmer on the outskirts of town called in, reporting something unusual: a fire, late at night, near an old hunting cabin that hadn't been used in years. The smell of burning plastic. The sound of a vehicle speeding away. When deputies arrived, the scene was chilling. Ashes still warm. Metal fragments half buried in the dirt. And among the charred remains, something small, a child's bracelet, half melted but still recognizable. The same bracelet Lily wore in the last photo posted to Maria's Facebook page. The cabin search unearthed more. A shovel, stained and discarded. Torn fabric matching Maria's clothing. And on the dirt floor, faint traces of blood, dragged toward the back door. Whoever did this didn't just want to hide something. They wanted to erase it. Completely. As forensic teams processed the scene, the realization hit hard: this wasn't just a missing persons case anymore. This was something far worse. And James? He wasn't just a person of interest anymore. He was the center of it all. The house stood in silence that night, broken only by the soft hum of distant sirens. Blue and red lights flashed against the walls, painting them in a harsh glow that stripped the room of its warmth. Officers moved in and out like shadows, their faces on the floor. A life that had once been vibrant lay still, surrounded by fragments of what used to be a home filled with laughter. Every photograph on the wall seemed to scream at the room, demanding answers that would never come. Neighbors stood outside, clutching their coats, whispering to each other in voices that trembled with shock. Some prayed, others stared blankly at the flashing lights, trying to make sense of the horror that had unfolded just steps away from their own doors. It was a night that would be etched in their memories forever, a night that stole the illusion of safety from an entire street. Inside, the lead detective removed his gloves slowly, his eyes scanning the room one last time. He had seen blood before, plenty of it, but there was something about this crime scene that clung to him. It wasn't just the brutality. It wasn't just the lifeless body on the floor. It was the quiet. The kind of quiet that feels heavy, almost alive, pressing down on everyone in the room. The suspect was gone, vanished, leaving behind nothing but chaos and unanswered questions. But he didn't vanish without purpose. Every overturned chair, every shattered frame, every smeared mark on the wall spoke of rage, cold, calculated rage. And the detective knew what that meant. This wasn't random. This wasn't a crime of impulse. Someone wanted this. Someone planned this. The following morning, headlines exploded. News anchors stood outside the home, voices grave, eyes locked on the camera as they tried to piece together what the public already feared: a life taken in the most brutal way, and a killer on the run. Social media caught fire, with theories spreading faster than facts. Some blamed jealousy, others whispered about money, and then there were those who suggested something far worse, something no one wanted to believe. At the funeral, the silence was deafening. Friends and family sat with blank stares, unable to comprehend how someone they loved could end up in a coffin before their time. There were tears, yes, but there was also something else lingering in the air: anger. The kind of anger that doesn't fade, the kind that demands justice. For the detectives, the case didn't end with the burial. It was only beginning. They combed through phone records, bank statements, hours of surveillance footage, and slowly, a picture began to emerge. It wasn't clear. Not yet. But the outline of a motive was starting to take shape. And it was uglier than anyone imagined. When the arrest finally came, it wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was quiet, almost anticlimactic: a knock on a door, a set of handcuffs, a voice reading rights that sounded almost hollow. The suspect didn't fight, didn't cry, didn't even look surprised. And maybe that was the most chilling part of all. In court, the truth spilled out piece by piece, every detail like a blade cutting into the hearts of those who had loved the victim. Text messages read aloud. Bank transactions displayed on screens. Witnesses stepping forward to speak words no one wanted to hear. By the time the verdict was read, the room was a storm of emotions: relief, rage, sorrow. But even with the sentence handed down, even with the promise that justice had been served, there was no real closure. Because no sentence can bring back a life. No punishment can erase the memory of what happened in that house. And as the years passed, the story never really went away. It lingered like a scar on the town, like a warning etched into its history. People moved on, yes. New families moved in. Laughter returned to the street. But for those who lived through it, for those who saw the lights flashing against the walls that night, the memory remained, a constant reminder that evil doesn't always come from strangers. Sometimes, it comes from the person you trust the most. If you're watching this and you think you know someone inside and out, think again. Because if this story teaches us anything, it's this: trust can be deadly. If this story moved you, don't let it end here. Domestic violence is not a private matter, it's a silent epidemic claiming lives every day. Mishi and Layla's story is a haunting reminder of what happens when warning signs are ignored. Share their story, speak up for those who can't, and support organizations working to protect victims before it's too late. If you suspect abuse, don't wait, make the call, report it, and be the voice that saves a life. For more true crime stories and the lessons they hold, subscribe, turn on notifications, and let's keep these conversations alive.